Good morning, everyone. So we're just going to wait another minute or two for everyone to be let in, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar.
Morning, folks. I am Jeremy Settlemeyer. I am the chair of this year's Trust and Estates Council. And welcome to this fully live interactive webinar brought to you by the Monroe County Bar Association Center for Education. This is the annual estate planning conference titled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Estate Planning, sponsored by the Trust and Estates section of the Monroe County Bar Association in collaboration with the Estate Planning Council of Rochester. Today is October 29th, 2021, and big thank you to our sponsors and underwriters, Bank of America Private Bank, Canandaigua National Bank and Trust Wealth Management, ESL Trust Services, Key Private Bank, Sage Ruddy and Company, and Tompkins Trust Company. Please remember to comply with accreditation regulations. Please make sure to fill out your affirmation form and evaluation sheet at the end of the program and email it back to Danielle. She's going to put her email address in the chat box. In exchange, you will receive your certificate of attendance after the program via email. Please note, all attorneys must attend the program in its entirety to receive credit. There will be 2 codes for this credit today. And according to New York State Continuing Legal Education Board, CLE providers are prohibited from issuing partial credit. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to my co-chair of the program, Maria Caton.
Good morning, everyone. I am Maria Caton, and the manager of financial planning services at Canandaigua National Bank, as well as a member of the Estate Planning Council. Today, we are so thrilled to have 2 speakers with us to speak on this topic of diversity and inclusion. Our first speaker today is Kit Mackney, who lives in Santa Monica, California. So we want to thank her for meeting and accommodating our early hours, as it is quite early on the West Coast. As a financial advisor, Kit's clients trust her for 2 main reasons. They know she cares and they value her experience. Kit feels this personal-professional combination gives her clients more confidence. Kit is a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley and is a certified financial planner, accredited estate planner, and certified specialist in plan giving. Kit is a participating speaker for the National Association of Estate Planners and Councils, and her presentation on diversity, equity, inclusion is one of those featured topics. And joining Kit, we have Rachelle Nuhfer, an attorney with Barklay, Damon. Rachelle primarily concentrates her practice on a variety of estate planning and trust administration matters. She also handles estate protection with the objective of structuring a comprehensive, effective, and flexible plan. And lastly, advises clients on other business and corporate matters, including succession planning, tax planning, and forming and structuring business entities. She is a member of Barklay Damon's Women's Forum and is a speaker at continuing education seminars. Please help me welcome both Kit and Rachelle. And to see a completed bio, please refer to the presentation.
One final point, folks, before you get started. Everyone's line, except for the speakers, have been muted for the presentation. If you have a question, please submit them using the question and answer feature. This is how we're going to go back and forth. If you'd like for the question to be anonymous, feel free to send it over to me or to one of the other panelists, and we're going to address it as we go through the program. So without further ado, Kit, to you.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here, and it's a great way to start my day. The sun is just rising outside my window as we speak. The first thing I want to mention, and there is still time to register, is we are having the 58th annual NAPAC Advanced Estate Planning Strategies. It's a virtual conference next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Some of the speakers include Sam Donaldson, Natalie Choate, Bob Keebler, Justin Miller, Jonathan Blackmarker, and Steve Leinberg. Some of the best in estate planning out there. The charge is $95 for a member of an estate planning council. And if you happen to be an accredited estate planner, it is free of charge. I look forward to seeing you there. And lastly, I want to talk about the accredited estate planner designation. This is the only credential of a graduate level that is multidisciplinary. It takes all of our expertise to be able to find the best solutions for our clients. There is no way that any one of us can know it all. Being an AEP is one of the greatest honors I've had because of the professionals that I share this designation with. People like Marnie Shankman, Hart Axley, Joanna Everett, so many more. And most importantly, this upholds one of the biggest things we talk about in NAPEC is collaboration. So NAPEC is our efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion are to cultivate a foundation for growth, both in our leadership, membership, and educational program. We are providing resources for councils if they have an interest in pursuing this in their own communities, both within the membership of their organization, but also in the individual professions as a whole. So what I want to start out with on the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion is that, first of all, this is a tough subject. It is also from time to time found to be, people believe that it's politically divisive. My goal here today is to start the conversation. And if people have questions, disagree with what I have to say, please feel free to express that. This is meant for all of us to learn and understand better what different people in our communities are experiencing. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of take a look in the mirror and see who we are, what some of our values are. And the most important thing is how we communicate. And it's a back and forth communication. And I really want you to think about if the profession of estate planning really reflects the diversity of our own communities. Are the people, when you're in a room together or on the screen when you can see everyone's face, is it reflective of your community and the people who live there? Because estate planning is for everyone. And the advisors we seek often look like us and have shared the same experiences. This is why it's important for this profession of estate planners to look at this. We need to know our communities. And I have a passion myself to help these communities build wealth. So why me? Some of my work actually started when I sat on the board of directors for a local Girl Scout council. When we went through a strategic planning process, one of the things we really wanted to do, because the community we served at the time, I didn't live in Santa Monica, had an enormous amount of low-income families, first-generation families and immigrants. We wanted to give our girls hope. We wanted to give them opportunities. And one of the things that happened in our experience is we Girl Scout, actually, we had 3 Girl Scout camps, and we wanted these Latinx girls to come to our Girl Scout camp. We provided everything, all the gear, paid for all the camp fees, everything. We even provided transportation, and parents or family members just had to get them close enough to a central place close by to be picked up to go to camp. Well, what we found, and this is overnight camp, what we found is that for Latinx families, daughters are not allowed to spend the night anywhere but with family members overnight until they're married, particularly in first-generation families. Now, my girls have been going to camp since they were 6 and 7 years old overnight, and this never entered my mind that these families would think differently about it. These are chaperoned activities. These are, they're in a safe environment. But we had to change our programming to be able to introduce the girls to the experiences we could give them. And so many of my experiences, and I can only speak for myself, don't always place me in a position to really notice my own biases and to notice the privilege, the amazing privilege I have enjoyed. And one of the biggest goals that we had when I was at Girl Scouts, and now as I'm co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I need to update this, it's now a committee, is to really educate all of us on what a big deal all of this is. So what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I heard this analogy given by a professional from Northern Trust, and it really stuck with me because it was something concrete. And what I want you to do is imagine a high school or a college dance. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being invited onto the dance floor. And equity is being the person who gets to choose the music for everyone to dance with. And the idea is moving up that hierarchy to truly be a part of whatever community people need to be in, and that everyone, regardless, is a part of it. And what does this have to do with life, our lives? The interesting part is I live in a large metropolitan city in Southern California, about 100 miles from the Mexican border. And race is a defining social construct of American life. In Los Angeles, there are very specific centers of different cultural backgrounds. I happen to live by one that is called Persian Square. It is where people from Iran came back in the late 70s, early 80s, and their families are right here. So why now? Well, I think we've come to a place, or I have at least, where the more different you are from me, the more interesting you are to me. It's exciting to build friendships, relationships, and have clients who have different backgrounds than I do. And they often teach me things that give me a different perspective. And the events of the past few years have changed my perspective in particular, and are serving as a catalyst for me to be more intentional and look for opportunities to help families without a history of wealth to begin creating that wealth through financial literacy and estate planning. So I want to show you a 4-minute video. The reason to show you this video is I became unbelievably I'm gonna have to stop my share because I forgot to do something. Unbelievably motivated to really understand the privilege I have experienced in my life. And some of the things my kids have experienced that I wasn't able to experience. And my kids are still very privileged. And the comments in this race that I'm going to show you are, sorry, I was clicking buttons, that I am going to show you are things I would have never thought of that differentiate. And in this case, it has nothing to do with race, except for at the end where you see who is left behind.
Hey, line up, everybody line up. We're about to race. Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this, a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm gonna make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go. If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
This is is the world we live in. And why is it important to our practices? As I said before, it's because people generally feel more comfortable sharing their ideas and relating concerns with people who understand their culture, who look and identify with them. This is important for us to serve our clients and everyone in our communities. And this estate planning is universal to everyone. I always use this phrase when I give presentations on planned giving. Everyone has stuff. Even the homeless people have stuff. It might not be stuff I want, but they have stuff. And estate planning is the best way for our families to build wealth over the generations and to keep it. The other reason is that our profession needs to be filled with individuals who represent their communities. For example, in the United States, and this is the whole country, and I understand the country's demographics in every community are different. The US population has about 13% are Black individuals. But for financial advisors, in comparison, only almost 8% are Black. Did you know, and this is 2018 information, that this could add over $60 billion to our revenue as a whole industry? It's something to think about. So the first thing to do within your practices, with your partner, with the people you work with on a regular basis, within your estate planning council and bar association, is to begin the conversation. NAPEC has an incredible amount of resources available on our website under our diversity page. That's our job, is to provide resources. There are things that can help you do to have some self-reflection, both as an individual and as a group. We need to be ready and willing to learn and to be open to the conversations, and mostly to be able to learn about what we don't know. Because often we don't know what we don't know. We are all smart professionals on it here today. We need to be empathetic, and we need to be open to being vulnerable. We need to be a little curious, and this is mine, I'm a task-oriented person. We need to see if we can make small efforts to make a difference. You know, I walk to work every day, and it's, I'm walking down Wilshire Boulevard, which happens to be I'm near one of the busiest intersections in the city. And, you know, one of my things is to smile at everyone, even the guys who are sound asleep on the street, and to look everyone in the eye. Is that a big deal? No, but it's a change for me. It's something different. So these are some suggested questions that have come from some of the resources from NAPEC and other materials that I have read and looked for. There are more things to do. But the interesting questions are, when were you, for example, first aware of your race and your ethnic background? Okay. What are the things that you remember from childhood? You know, one of the things that I remember from childhood is when I was in the 5th or 6th grade, a Black family moved into our neighborhood. Happened to be that there were twin girls the same age that ended up in my class. And we always sat near each other because at the time my last name started with a W. And I lived outside the city of Detroit, okay, at the time. someone placed a burning cross on their front yard. And this was in 1971. Okay. That is an experience that has stuck with me, that I observed from a distance, but believe me, it made me think. Okay. And one of the big things as professionals that I think we need to look at, and I commend you for allowing me to speak on this topic, is what are some of the content that could be covered at conferences and meetings? Who are the speakers that you have? Okay, today we have 2 women speaking. That doesn't always happen. This isn't just about race. This is about diversity in all kinds of aspects that we find in life. The other thing is there are some distinct differences in doing different estate planning for different religious and cultural groups. I'm going to share one with you today because it is such a startling difference. Some statistics in the financial services industry. I have some for others. Nearly 80% of financial advisors are white. About 7% are Asian. This is a 2019 data that I got from datausa.io. 6% were African American and 5% were Latinx. I include that because I live in Southern California. And honestly, in California, the Latinx population makes up approximately 45% of the population of the entire state. Continuing, in a broader sense, only three of 168 senior executives are Black or people of color. Only 13 board members out of 119 board members for financial services companies are Black. Non-white employees, Black, Asian, and other minorities totaled 21% and change. Okay, this compares with 24.9% of employees who are non-white in banking and related services. Now, this is just banking and related services, and the point of the top 2 is that number, that percentage dramatically declines as people move up the hierarchy. And overall, 22.3% are non-white Caucasian in our overall workforce in the United States. And law. Racial minorities and equity partnership ranks are 5.6%. Now, granted, this goes back to 2015. I have not been able to find data that is more recent. But it's interesting because women make up 50% of law school graduates. That's great, because even back in 1970, less than 5% of law school graduates were women. People of color only make up 25% of law school graduates. This is representative of the population at this point in time. And women and people of color make up 45 to 22% of law firm associates, respectively. Interesting. Less than 6% make it partner. Women are slightly over half of the population but only 35% of practicing attorneys. Blacks and Latinx are just over a third of the population, but they are only 10% of attorneys. The percentage of women of general counsel for the Fortune 500 has increased continuously since 2014 to 25% in 2016. What I will tell you is women make up more than 50% of the population, and diversity includes sex. The percentage of racially diverse Black, Latinx, Asian general counsel of the Fortune 500 is approximately 10%. 10%. So that's the profession. Okay. Now let's take a look at what's happening in, thank you. I skipped one. It moved too slow. Why the alarm for Black Americans in particular? So the African Americans have the capacity to pass on more wealth to the previous generation, and the wealth needed to continue to finance the progress and empowerment of future generations. You work hard your whole life to create wealth, achieve professionally, build a business, provide for your family, only to die without a will. And it doesn't make sense. Of all the what ifs that go into a lifetime of money management, financial planning, estate planning, one thing is unavoidable. Life will end one day. In order for there to be more equitable distribution of wealth, one of the commitments I've made is to work with these different groups to help them understand the importance of planning and how that can help their families, okay? So no estate plan puts the ability to transfer wealth to future generations at risk. And it comes at a tremendous cost. Estate planning probate costs, and this will vary state to state, are cost and a collective $2 billion annually, including more than $1.5 billion in attorney's fees. Now you'll go, well, these families aren't going to be affected by this, but think about it. Probate, and I don't know for New York, but in the state of California, if you have assets, regardless of the debt against them, that value more than $150,000, you're going to probate if you have no will, if you have no trust, period, exclamation point. Now, if I have 150,000 and my house is all in debt and my house is worth 300,000, that's an awful lot of money going out the door. That $2 billion includes attorney's fees. But my point is that the average home in the entire United States is now close to, the average value is close to $300,000. I granted it's less in some places, but I will tell you it does not take much of a house to get above $500,000 in California. And New York is probably not that much different. The other thing is business ownership. 15% of white families own businesses versus 7% for Black families. In June of 2020, there was a 41% of Black-owned businesses closed. Why did that happen? Because of what those businesses are. Most of them are service industries. That or they're businesses that are providing the restaurants. Only 4.8% of Fortune 500 companies are Black or were built by Black families. Of 614 billionaires in the US, only 5 are Black, and all 5 are self-made billionaires. They did not inherit money from their families. Black college graduates owned an average of 23,000 plus change in loans versus their white peers at 16%. And 4 years later, that 23,000 had grown to over 53,000 because of the interest loan owed and their inability to make more than the minimum payments. And 62% have no retirement assets and are solely relying on Social Security to be their income. And retirement, it is not unusual for it to outlast 35 plus years. Black Americans have more than $1 trillion. Okay, that's a lot of zeros. In spending power through homes and other real estate they acquire, investment portfolio, 2 million businesses owned. But wealth building isn't just about financing our lives. It's about leaving a legacy for our families to build upon. And financial literacy, it is amazing to me continuously and what people don't know that I take so for granted. Okay? And how important it is for families who want to lift their families out of poverty. And they could do it if they only knew how. And if there were people out there that could teach them. 70% of Black Americans have no will or estate plan in place. It means no resources to launch a business, to finance the growth, to help their children and their grandchildren minimize their student loans, to take care. All it takes sometimes to get it started is for that first generation to look towards tomorrow and beyond it. And it means, you know, it means updating these things as life goes on. And I'm preaching to the choir here. Those of you who are here today are interested in this. And wealth building is super important for the empowerment of people. So one example that I found absolutely fascinating. So one of the cornerstones that as estate planners, we know full well is life insurance. This is a cornerstone of estate planning. It's a cornerstone of making sure that your family has enough in the case of a catastrophic event. And we know that regardless of your age, life insurance is a flexible tool that can provide for more than just taking care of your heirs. First of all, they have a belief that life insurance is only for their final expenses. And that they are people, they have pride, and they think of life insurance as being something that you pass the hat for to make sure that the services are paid for, the plot is available, and any of the costs having to do with burial are taking place. They don't want handouts. You know, they don't want just to be given money. And that is the way they look at it. They have life insurance, maybe through their job, and I've got enough. They don't know that they need more than that 50,000 or that 20,000. which may be based upon the amount. Now, I know a lot of us don't make a lot of money on low-income individuals, but I can't tell you how rewarding it's been over the past several years, helping young adults put these practices in place and seeing how they're caring for their families. It's only for my beneficiary. Why should I care? Well, do you want to take care of your beneficiaries? Most of these families are multi-generational in one home, or they have extended families. Aunts are taking care of nieces and nephews. Grandparents are taking care of their grandchildren, sometimes great-grandchildren. And they have this idea that all life insurance is huge policies above $5 million. It comes from what they see in the media, and it comes to the cost is too high. Okay. Now let's take a look at some of the Latinx barriers. 80% of Latinx households, 25 to 64, only have about $10,000 in retirement savings, versus 50% on non-Latinx. Now, that is an issue for everyone, but it seems to be more so for Latinx. 15% of Latinx families only have 3 months of living expenses. That means that the other 85% are living paycheck to paycheck. This is versus 42% of non-Latinx families. 28% of Latinx families have high financial literacy, compared with 43 and 38% for white and Asian Americans. Okay, the typical Hispanic family only has about $100,000 or $20,000 in net worth, where non-Hispanic families have a little bit more than 100,000. Part of that is through home ownership. Part of that is retirement planning. 83% of Latinx, this is important, are US millennials, which means between 24 and the age of 40. This is something, and they have no retirement savings, but this is something that as a profession we need to understand. Millennials are full-fledged professionals. I have daughters who are in their mid-30s who have well over 10, 15 years of gainful adult grown-up job employment and experience. They are experts in their fields. Latinx millennials represent over 21% of US millennials. They are an enormous part of the future growth of the country we live in. And the median age is 27. So most of them are very young. 4 challenges for Latinx. Latinx families own fewer financial assets. Young Latinx, and this is an enormous issue, are putting all of their money to their student loans. They are being educated. However, they're having to pay for it themselves and don't have the support of their families for a variety of reasons. They don't have financial literacy. They also face unique challenges, both long and short term, in savings. Latinx families are multi-generational. They live together, they're very tight. And Latinx families not only help family here in the US, they also help families in their country of origin. And it's not necessarily just those people who came in the last 20 or 30 years. It is families who have been here for 4 and 5 generations that still help the families back home. Other cultural differences, and this is where it's important for us to understand. These differences are cultural. It's about the way that people think. And so in Africa, it is often across the continent that they worship their ancestors and individuals who have gone on to the next life. It's a cornerstone of what they do. In Asia, in China, funerals are filled with rituals, but they can't talk about it. To talk about death, to talk about planning for death and what happens afterwards, they can't talk about it. It's considered bringing on terrible karma. In Korea, people have devotion to their parents. In the Middle East, there is a simple focus on the actions of the deceased. It's traumatic, and yet again, they don't want to talk about what to do after death. In Europe, there's secular and religious efforts. In North America, there's denial. First of all, in the US, very few people want to admit the fact that we're going to die. Everyone's trying to work on how do we live longer. And we have the technology, we have the nutrition, we have things that help us live longer, but it's thought of to talk about this stuff as being morbid or taboo. And in Mexico, fascinatingly enough, it is considered a new beginning, and they do have open conversation about it. So the one area of estate planning that I found absolutely fascinating when I dug into this, and I'm talking about it not because I know everything about it, I don't, but was the fact that Islamic law determines your estate plan. And it is decidedly different than what the state says. They have a mandatory, non-discretionary system that rules and governs it. So they use the term, and I'm going to mess the pronunciation up, and my apologies, is wasiya. It's the only discretionary bequest you can give. And it is merely 1/3 of the estate. That is the maximum amount that is discretionary. Okay? If a person who practices Islam dies intestate, these precepts from their faith will not be honored because it doesn't match the law. So here's an example, and I use this to kind of, because examples help me understand. It believes that wealth belongs to Allah. You can't own what you can't take with you, which I have to say, I agree with. I have been to many funerals, many memorial services, and I have never seen a U-Haul behind the hearse. Never. Or at the memorial service. The system is based on a formula of primary beneficiaries, who are the spouse, the children, and the parents, and contingent beneficiaries, a range of people upstream, downstream, and sideways. It's a math problem, period. And you don't get to give everything to your spouse. which is a cornerstone of US tax law. So at her death, Aisha was married to Harun and had 2 sons, Elias and Mustafa, and 2 sons and 1 daughter, Fatima. Her parents, Beliquis and Sual Hale, I apologize, survived her. She also has 2 brothers and a sister. So Aisha's inheritance would get distributed as follows. Her husband gets 1/4. 1/4. Her sons get 1/6 each. But her daughter only gets 1/12. She gets 1/2 of what her brothers got. Her parents get 1/6. And her brothers and sisters don't inherit at all. So, and it gets more complicated when a portion of the family has already passed on. And I didn't go into that, but the hope is that I don't pass away before my mother. Okay, that doesn't always happen. And it is Islamic law that daughters get 50% of what sons get, period. So, some best practices for us. These are some easy steps that cost nothing. Add to your email a footer, a statement of your personal pronouns. I have not done this. Mine would be she and her. I have seen it being done. It's a simple step forward on the diversity and inclusivity continuum. Update your organizers and questionnaires. I have, over the past 6 months, have 2 clients where beneficiaries had to have been changed because beneficiaries have changed their sex. And I don't want there to be any issues going forward. Okay, change it to make sure that that you want to permit expression of religious and cultural and other concerns they may be planning for. That the terms of your documents are gender neutral. And make an effort. I encourage the Estate Planning Council in particular to provide services to those who are not typically our clients. One of the estate planning councils in our national association have went out, actually it was in Detroit, and provided for 2 days during the year. They went to firehouses and provided estate planning to first responders. Okay, understand this. Our clients represent less than 10% of the country's net worth. Okay. Someone with $1.2 million of net worth, inclusive of their home, is part of 10%. They are the top 10%. And how many of us work with clients, we want to work with clients who have more than that? It's a small pool. So this, and I'm not sure how well you can see it, I actually took from nycourts.gov. And it's some of the description of what happens if someone dies intestate. If there's a spouse and no children, the spouse inherit everything. If there's children but no spouse, children inherit everything. Spouse and children, spouse gets 50 grand plus half the balance. Children get everything else. Is that the same as what was in the example I gave for the Islamic family? No. We need to understand these differences to be able to make sure that we articulate to clients how and the public how important estate planning is, but how we can help them do it the way they want to accomplish what they want. Our assets, our wealth has a purpose. Now, everybody's purpose is different, but it has a purpose. How can we help our clients? This is my mission. How can I help my clients achieve their purpose? So think about towards the profession, becoming a mentor or a reverse mentor. Could a younger professional mentor me so that I can learn more? Learn about allyship. Allyship is a way for us to support people who are different than we are. And the best ways to do it are often not intuitive, to me at least. Recommend people of color and of different sexual orientation for advancement. Give the gift of education. This is probably one of the greatest gifts as a profession that we could do, is to help individuals learn more about the profession of estate planning and also to build our profession to look more like our communities. Some of the estate planning councils across the country are working really hard to partner with law schools, with business schools, with accounting programs to help introduce this idea to students who have not experienced estate planning in their families. And be aware of where your sources of information come from. I think one of the greatest things we can do right now in all aspects of our lives is to know where our sources are. There's a lot of misinformation out there on every side of the spectrum. And for us to be intentional about where we go in. Roy T. Bennett said, "You never change your life until you step out of your comfort zone. Change begins at the end of your comfort zone." And the key is to be intentional, and it just takes baby steps. Collaborate, help a diverse younger professional, engage with younger professionals, find out about an association that is specifically working with groups that haven't been represented in the estate planning. I'm going to show you a list of organizations that we in NAPEC have found over the last year and a half. It takes very little effort. Younger professionals, what I will tell you is they are very open with working with younger people. Or with people who are different than they are. I see it in my 3 children and the difference in their biases versus mine. And our biases reflect how we think, and they're very subtle. And until the last couple of years when I've been working on this stuff, it's been an evolution. I have become more and more aware of my own biases. Create inclusive work environments. This is for us. It will not only help, it will help build your practice. We need to hire. There are studies done across all fields that if you take out the names of individuals, how it will change whether a man or a woman with the same credentials is hired or not. And so yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. So 6 things to do this week. I like to-do lists. Start talking about it. Define, and I'm not going to use racism going forward. What does diversity mean for you in your practice, the people you serve, as well as the people you work with? Evaluate your policies, your documents, and be aware who's not at the table. Notice. And also pay attention to who your vendors are. Are the businesses you're using to support your business reflective of your community? So one of the most important things, NAPEC is dedicated to collaborating, educating, and cultivating. One of my goals as a leader of NAPEC is to really help our local councils in sharing their ideas. We need to be intentional about this stuff. We need to be willing to talk about it if it is a passion for you. Start the conversation. Acknowledge that there may be a lack of diversity. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I don't like change. And I don't like making changes in my life. But when I have made difficult changes in my life has always been better for it. It's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for your practices to improve, and more importantly, for your practices to grow. And it's not a quick fix, but the best things usually aren't. My new slogan is life is patient perseverance. So the key to change is to be intentional. Often in our lives, we just keep going through the motions day in, day out. Our days are busy. We are focused. Try to be intentional about this. So this is a list of programs. All of you have gotten a copy of this. You could cut and paste some of these links that you'll see. There have been programs, the CFP Board of Standards. We have a DEI page. Local councils and organizations are giving scholarships. National Black College Conference, Black Catholics. We at NAPEC have produced some content. In fact, we just had our accredited estate planners just had the opportunity to see a program where some individuals, practitioners talked about it. It was excellent, by the way. Articles and white papers if you want to find out more. Webinars and events. These are places, this CFP board put this on a year ago. Marty Shankman has put together materials. Marty is probably one of the most generous people I know with materials out there. And he is so wonderful about adding to the knowledge of estate planning. These are a few books. I've read 2 of them. My favorite is Better Allies. Once again, it's like me, I'm task-oriented. Tell me what I can do. There are short videos, podcasts you can listen to. Some presenters recently, this will take you to them. And we also have access to other assessments, some other websites. And the next couple of slides are a list of membership organizations that are listed that I never knew existed until about a year ago. And these are all estate planning partnership organizations. These are my sources. I do have a call of action. If you would like to volunteer with NAPEC, we'd love to see you at the national level. I have a monthly outlook on the markets. If there's another Morgan Stanley professional in your region, I am quite confident they'd be able to help you get it. And let me know if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn or if I can help you with anything, a follow-up call. And my name's Kit McNee. I'm with Morgan Stanley, and here is my contact information. I want to thank you for your time. I hope I didn't take too much. No one told me to stop. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Kit. I think that's a good place to transition over to Rachelle. Also, at this time, I will be giving out the first code, which is 5511. So again, the first code for this CLE is 5511.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Kit. That was a really informative and helpful presentation. Well, good morning. It's my pleasure and privilege to be part of this presentation on a really important topic. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so I thought I would start out by with a question rather of why is this important? Why is diversity, equity, inclusion important in estate planning? And Kit gave us a whole host of reasons why, but I thought I'd bring a different perspective here in that as attorneys, and I know a number of the participants on the webinar here are attorneys, we're subject to our New York rules of professional conduct. And the very first rule, Rule 1.1, requires that we be competent, that a lawyer provide competent representation to a client. The fact that this is the first rule, I think, emphasizes the importance of this rule among the others. And as our client bases and as our prospective client bases become increasingly diverse, for estate planning attorneys to stay relevant, to continue serving clients effectively, this idea of cultural competence is going to play an increasingly important role in fulfilling our ethical responsibilities and providing competent representation. So what is cultural competence? Okay, so there is a whole host of research and literature on the topic of cultural competence. A simple Google search will yield a lot of results, a lot of scholarly results on what this means. But, I think in the context of estate planning, the definition that I found particularly helpful or relevant is the ability to understand, appreciate, and interact with people from cultures or belief systems that are different from your own. So, in the estate planning context, what I think is it refers to the ability of lawyers to establish trust with the client and to understand their concerns and objectives while recognizing that the cultural lens that they're viewing, through which they're viewing the world. It's important, I think, to remember that cultural competence doesn't require becoming an expert in various cultures. I think Kit provided a really helpful overview of some, in certain cultures, some myths or particular issues that are important in cultures. But to be culturally competent, it doesn't require that you be an expert on every single culture. I think it does, in some circumstances, help to have some basic understanding. But more than that, I think it's an ability to be open to the idea that the client is coming from a different perspective, to adjust your behavior as a result, and in some situations to do some research so that you can become competent. on that culture and gain an understanding of the background from which that client is coming from and the lens through which they're viewing the world. So, in my practice, I thought it would be helpful to think of some techniques or some strategies that, at least from my perspective, help me try to be culturally competent in my interactions with my estate planning clients. So, to me, this boils down to creating an open, inclusive environment for my clients so that they feel comfortable sharing what's important to them and helping me gain an understanding of some things that may be important in their culture or where they're coming from. And these are these are good practices for any estate planning attorney, but I think they really help an attorney exercise this cultural competency and be culturally competent. So the first one is active listening. And I included a quote here from the Dalai Lama. So when you talk, you're only repeating what you know, but if you listen, you may learn something new. And what I found as I continue along in my practice, I'm better off if I focus less on talking and trying to show or demonstrate to the client all this substantive knowledge that I have. If I focus first on listening and asking follow-up questions, on really trying to gain an understanding of what's driving this client. It's not always finances, it's not always money. A lot of times it's emotional, it's the relationships. I know that I know the substantive law, and that's going to come through in my interactions with the clients, and I'm better spending time listening than spending time talking. Being empathetic, really being able to put yourself in that client's shoes and trying to understand why they feel the way they feel, what's making them tick or what's keeping them up at night. Language matters. So, in Kit's presentation, she referenced looking at your planning questionnaires or looking at your documents and changing them to gender neutral wherever possible. And certainly my team, my firm, and I have put a lot of effort into this over the past few years. So, as an example, in our trust documents and our will documents, for the most part, we have moved away from using his, her pronouns, they pronouns. And for the most part, they're not needed. So for example, if I'm granting my executor some power or some discretion, there really isn't any need to say, I give my executor this power to exercise in his or her discretion. Most of the time, you can just fill in the word executor again, and the executor's sole and absolute discretion. If you're referring to a spouse, you don't need to use the term husband or wife or his or her. It's, as my spouse may need, and for my spouse's health, education, support, maintenance. So, if you take a look and intentionally review your documents where you've used his or her, ask yourself a question, do I need that? And, from an efficiency perspective, if you're going to be using that document maybe as a base for the other spouse's will or the other spouse's trust, it's a place that you don't have to go back and remember to go back and change him to her or her to him or to them. So, I think it's a pretty easy way to make yourself more inclusive and practice that cultural competence. Another example for language matters. So, I mentioned using an estate planning questionnaire, or Kit mentioned rather, using a estate planning questionnaire. My team and I use estate planning questionnaires, particularly for new clients when we're getting to know the client, their family, their assets. If you're referring to spouses, avoiding the term husband and wife and using, spouse one and spouse two. When I'm meeting with a client and they've listed, if they have children, if they're listing their children's information, I try not to make assumptions about the child's gender identification. So instead of saying, tell me about him or her, I'll say, tell me about Chris. Or if they've indicated that the child's married, I try not to make any assumptions that the child's married to somebody of the same sex, or I'm sorry, of the opposite sex. So I'll say, tell me about Chris's spouse instead of, Chris's husband or Chris's wife. So, it may seem small, but it's an indication to the client that this is an inclusive environment. that you're not coming to the table with any assumptions about the client or the people that are important to the client. So, and another example here in my practice, I worked with a client recently who had a child who was transgender, and the child was a minor. The child was in middle school, had just recently come out as transgender. And so it was really important, not only in the meeting with the client, but in the documents for the client, making sure that I wasn't unintentionally misgendering the client. The question came up, and because the child, in part because the child was a minor, the child's legal name was still the child's birth name. They had not gone through the process of legally changing that client's name to, that child's name to the child's preferred name. And so in drafting the client's will, I was careful in the dispositive provisions to refer to the child's preferred name. It was a question in my mind, is this the right thing to do? Do I need to make some reference to the child's legal name? So what I did was in all of the wills that I use and that my team use, we have a paragraph that refers to who the family members are. When we say children, who are we referring to? In that paragraph, I referred to the child by the child's preferred name. I did include a small line saying that the child was formerly known as, and I included the birth name there just to be clear about who I was referring to, but I didn't want to make that the emphasis. I wanted to make it clear to the client that I was referring to the child by the child's preferred name. One of the other questions that came up with that client was from the financial advisor. So when we were working on updating the beneficiary designations for retirement accounts in connection with updating the plan, his concern was whether the account custodian was going to accept the child's preferred name if it wasn't the child's legal name, and it required some research on his end to make sure that the beneficiary designation was going to be accepted. So, another, I would say, fundamental point or practice to exercise this cultural competency is avoiding assumptions. And, we've talked a little bit about this already, but, another case that came to mind is one that one of my colleagues worked on recently, which was estate planning for clients who were members of the Seneca Nation of Indians. And one of the clients, this was a married couple, a husband and wife, and the wife was a successful business owner. She had operating businesses as well as real estate. And in their particular clan, this was a matriarchal society, and there were restrictions on men and on husbands owning real property or other assets. And these were high net worth clients. We were doing some estate tax planning. There was a concern about New York estate tax. And, as the attorneys on this webinar well know, there's no concept of portability in New York for estate tax purposes. And so for planning purposes, a lot of times it's important to equalize assets between spouses to minimize estate tax and leverage estate tax exemptions. And this was a big concern for these clients because they didn't want, and they felt restricted in their ability to have the husband own assets. And so, to be competent, to provide competent representation in this situation, it required research on our end to determine if this was going to be an issue for New York estate tax. We had to do research on whether the tribal land was going to be includable in the taxable estate to begin with. And so it was certainly none of my team members came into this representation with a tremendous amount of substantive knowledge about this clan in particular and of the Seneca Nation of Indians. But, in exercising in fulfilling our duty to be competent, we did a lot of research and became a lot more knowledgeable so that we could provide that competent representation. So, one topic I want to spend just a little bit of time on too, in the practical, for purposes of providing some practical examples, is the topic of marriage. And certainly this isn't unique to any one client or another, but in the context of working with LGBTQ plus clients, because of the historical exclusion of same-sex couples from the institution of marriage, it can be a topic that requires care and understanding and questions for the client about how they feel about marriage. So I can think of a number of situations where I've worked with a same-sex couple or a gay couple or a lesbian couple who are long-term partners, and they're not married, and they either have no intention of being married or they're not sure if they want to get married. And it certainly bears on the estate plan. Marriage is relevant for a whole host of reasons and provides legal rights and has financial implications and tax implications. So, for example, one of my colleagues worked with a lesbian couple a couple of years ago on their estate plan, and one of the clients was selling her business. It was a big liquidity event. We were doing estate tax planning. They were not married. They weren't planning on being married, but they wanted to understand what the tax implications were of remaining unmarried or getting married. And so, what we did was essentially a financial analysis of this is what the tax picture looks like. If you decide to get married, this is what the tax picture looks like. If you don't, they were considering a change of domicile, a change of residency. So we were looking at their plan with under a number of different circumstances, but it was really important for us not to assume or presume that they wanted to get married, that even the tax benefits of it were going to be the determining factor for them, because they weren't. Another client that I worked with recently, this was a same-sex couple in a long-term partnership, long-term committed relationship. One of the clients was ill. It was very likely that he was going to need nursing home care in the very near future. And they were concerned about asset protection, and they had never gotten married. They didn't have really strong opinions one way about it or the other. And, we outlined some of the implications. Here's what if we were doing Medicaid planning for you and you were married, here's what we would recommend. If you remain unmarried, here are our options. Here are the strategies that we can use. And they decided to get married, primarily because of the options or planning opportunities that we had if they were married. So, approaching the topic of marriage from a fact-based perspective and not making any assumptions or providing any judgments, I think was really important in those circumstances. I have a client I just finished working with that they're a same-sex couple. They're not married. They're not planning to be married. Their plans benefit each other if one of them passes away. And they are both estranged from their families because their families don't accept that they're members of the LGBT community. And so one of the planning concentrations for them was avoiding probate, because if one of them died, given that they weren't married, their distributees were going to be siblings, and they had no contact with the siblings. They didn't want the siblings to be provided with notice or to have any opportunity to object to their estate plan. So we ended up focusing on making sure that we were avoiding probate for those clients. So one topic I thought I would focus for a few minutes on is,
move along.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure.
We've got one question in the chat.
Great.
What is your practice for the pronouns and notary blocks? Do you see any issue with, if you change them to binary gendered terms?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a problem, right? Most of them are standard language, he, she, circle the one that's appropriate.
Yep, that's a great question. So I think the notary block that my firm or that my group primarily uses is, he/sleets, she/they, and I don't circle any one of them. I've never run into an issue with it. And, from a pure drafting perspective, it's helpful because then I don't have to go back and remember and change it every single time I'm notarizing someone's signature. I know we've had deeds recorded with that notary block. We haven't had an issue with it. If anyone has other experience, I'd welcome inputting a message into the chat, or adding your own experience is always helpful.
Right, I think that's smart. Obviously, if you're going through and changing the notary block every single time to say he, her, she, him, or whatever, there's the chance you're gonna miss one, or it's gonna be opposite. Whereas you can just leave them and don't circle them. You're accomplishing the same thing. It's appropriate to whichever, however they identify.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say
it also makes less work for us, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just more efficient, right? I mean, we want to be competitive. We want to provide value for our clients, and our fees, we should spend our time on, the issues that are important to our clients. I think that the gender issue too goes beyond even members of the LGBT community. I mean, I have clients who either their names are gender neutral. And I've said to my staff, don't make assumptions about someone's gender or their children's gender. Don't say, dear Mr. or Ms., just, use the person's first name. That way you're not going to risk misgendering somebody, even if they are not a member of the LGBT community. So I think it's just good practice, frankly.
Yeah, and I think you're about to dive into it, but the question that came up for me was, you're in a situation where somebody has, pretty conservative opinions about changing their identification, and they don't want to acknowledge, the grandchild's changing their name, or the child's changing their name, or their identity, or at least they're now identifying in line with what they've always been. How do you, as a practitioner, address that? I mean, is a situation where you say, listen, if we are misidentifying them, there's a chance that there could be an issue come time for inheritance, or whatever.
Yeah.
It looks to me like the next slide's probably going to tackle that. So I'll
it was a perfect segue. I appreciate it. So, I think this is a really important topic. It's one that can make us a little uncomfortable, but like Kit said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. One of my mentors, Karen Schaefer, uses a phrase, outside your comfort zone is where the magic happens. So we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. But, what if the client's intentions, what if their testamentary intentions are in conflict with, your own personal values? And I think your example, Jeremy, is a good one of misidentifying a child or a grandchild. I had a situation not too long ago. I was working with a client. It was a newer client to me. It was a woman in her 90s, and the first thing she said when I met with her is, I want to exclude my son. And what I learned from my meeting with her was that her son was transgender, identified as a woman. She was, misgendering her child all over the place in our conversation, and it was uncomfortable at the beginning. And my thought was, can I work with this client if the sole reason she's excluding this child from her estate plan is because of this child's, lived experience and gender identity, that was going to be really hard for me. What I learned through the course of the meeting and asking questions and digging deeper was this had been a strained relationship for a very long time, that the child had engaged in some financial transactions with mom, and mom felt that she had been taken advantage of by the child, and that, the child had received many assets already from mom, and that essentially the child had already received the child's inheritance. And that was really the basis for excluding the child from the plan. So in that situation, I felt that I could represent that child competently, and that I didn't, the conflict with what I felt like were my personal values wasn't going to prohibit me from representing that client competently. I did, in the definitions clause, and when I was referring to who the client's children were, I did use the client's preferred name with a reference to a reference to the child having formerly been known as. the birth name, and the client was comfortable with that. And I did talk about, we want to bring some clarity here. We want to confirm in the document that you have testamentary capacity, that you know who your children are, the natural bounty, the natural trying to remember the legal term for it, object of your bounty. Thank you. Yes. And so it's a good idea to refer to this child by the child's preferred name, and she was comfortable with that. But, I haven't, I guess, in my practice, I have not run into a situation where the client's views were such that I didn't feel that I could competently represent the client because they wanted to exclude a child, for example, because they were a member of the LGBT community, or that they had a spouse, for example, who was a member of a different race. If someone's had experiences and they are willing to weigh in or share in the comments, I think that would be valuable. I can certainly imagine a situation where that would come up, and I think my obligation to the client, I think, could be me saying, I think you'd be better served by working with one of my colleagues who maybe doesn't feel the same level of conflict that I do. I could imagine that being an outcome, at least in my practice. Can't see, it doesn't look like there are any questions coming up in the chat, Jeremy, but if I'm missing something, please interrupt me.
No, it looks pretty quiet at the moment.
Okay.
So, I think it's a good point. So one issue that actually came up, and I was thinking about it as we were talking about on the estate planning side, is, we had an estate come through, and the grandmother was not concerned, but she was aware of one of the grandchildren transitioning. And she didn't want to offend. She didn't want to send out correspondence to this grandchild with the previous name, as that grandchild was changing it. She was asking us, how do we address it? And we did through the formerly known as designation, so that all correspondence in the future, at least receipts and releases, appropriately identified them after the fact. After once the change was complete, or at least because this was happening during the administration process. But it was interesting. It was actually the first time I'd had that conversation with a grandparent or with a parent about that. And before it, I had never even considered that writing a letter to, and this is more or less for me to address my values and be aware of these things, get uncomfortable in these conversations, or get comfortable with the uncomfortable. When it was to recognize that, addressing every letter to dear sir or dear madam, just based on their name, is not, it doesn't always work. It may actually be offensive to someone. So it's just one that came up.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. So I want to talk a little bit, just coming back to the topic of marriage. I'm sure we've all had the experience of meeting with the client, and we're learning about the client's family, and they say, oh, I hate my child's spouse, or I hate my child's significant other, and I'm scared they're going to get married, and this is terrible. Or even that I'm afraid that my child, they're happily married now, but if they got divorced a year after I die, is that money that they inherit going to get tied up in a divorce proceeding, and is it going to be equitably distributed to that divorcing spouse? I'm concerned about that. I'm sure we've all dealt with scenarios that are similar to that, and we know that from a matrimonial law perspective, generally inherited money is separate property, but there's always the concern about commingling, right? And sticking that inherited money in a joint account with the spouse, or otherwise making that once separate property now marital property. So, I can tell you in my own practice, we are increasingly using trusts for children's shares of inherited money. And, it's not always because the child isn't able to manage inherited funds, or that it would, ruin their lives, or that they require a trustee to help them with managing the money. It's a lot of times concerned that the child may get divorced, or the child may die soon after the parents or the parent, and that the estate plan has everything going to the spouse, and they may really love the spouse, but let's say the clients or the child is young, that spouse is likely to get remarried. And though that client loves their child's spouse, they really want the child's inherited money to flow down to the grandkids, for example, or to other children. So, we're increasingly using trusts for children's shares, partly out of that concern. I just make a note, I view that as a good way to address concerns about the effect of marriage and children being married and the legal rights or practical implications of where that inherited money may flow if the child's married. I would make a note that generally speaking, in New York, and this is true in other states as well, imposing a restraint on marriage for testamentary purposes is generally against public policy. So I included in the materials that I circulated a recent case from an Indiana court that in that circumstance, the trust at issue had a child's inheritance going outright to him if he was unmarried. And if he was married, it was going into a trust. And it's an interesting case from my perspective, because what the court ended up concluding was in Indiana, there's a statute that prohibits a restraint on marriage in wills, but it didn't apply in this case because it wasn't a will, it was a trust. So the court ended up finding that it didn't run afoul of the restraint, the ban on restraints on marriage that the statute imposed, and the restraint was found valid. So I'm not aware of a statutory provision in New York, although I do think there's case law saying that testamentary intentions are generally going to be fulfilled, with the exception of those that may be against public policy. And I do believe there's a case that finds that a restraint on marriage is against public policy. But it's an interesting issue that comes up all the time with our clients when something they want to put in place in their plan either brushes up against what we find as our individual values, or potentially risk as being against public policy. And I think the lesson is, to the greatest extent that we can, our job is to make sure that our clients' wishes are fulfilled. And if we really feel that our own values are so in conflict with this client's intentions that we can't competently represent them, then I think it's our obligation to recommend one of our colleagues or to let them know that. I will, this is a really, like I said, it's an important topic. And I think it's important for all of us because of our ethical obligations and our requirement that we provide competent representation. I did find that ACTEC, the American Conference of Trust and Estate Counsel, has a web series of DEI issues in estate planning. I included in the materials transcripts of a couple of those videos, one on cultural competency and the other on helping transgender clients change their legal records to reflect their preferred names. And I'd invite you to take a look at that web series. There are some really interesting topics, some topics that will probably make a lot of us uncomfortable at first, and but it's okay, and it's okay to try to overcome that discomfort and to try to learn something new. That was all I had on my end of the presentation. Kit, I'd welcome your input on anything that I talked about, or if there are other questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, the material that you've attached, there's quite a bit of good material there as well. In folks' PDF version, all of those sites in both Rachelle's as well as Kit's are clickable. So as you go through the material, certainly if you're looking to educate yourself or at least get a little bit more background on some of the topics she talked about, specifically the estate planning for Muslims, or for, I'm trying to find the exact page it's on now, Scientologist is on there, Jewish clients. I mean, there's some pretty interesting material. Feel free to click through and then send your comments. I believe Maria has a question as well.
I do. So this is getting back to the conversation on cultural differences with regards to estate planning. If we acknowledge that there are, based on religious or other cultural beliefs that really prohibit them from having those conversations. How do we advise clients in those situations or even broach the conversation?
Yeah, so for me, a part of it is the whole discovery process, which is a core of being a certified financial planner. My lingo for it is, to have my clients give me a snapshot of where they are today. And it's not just looking at the financial assets. It's how is their life structured around their family? What is it that makes them tick? How do they spend their time? And then it's the other part, which is sometimes the most difficult part, is encouraging them to paint for me a picture of what they want for the future. And with respect for estate planning, that really is about what's the purpose for all of these assets that we can't take with us. What is it? I'm starting to work with a family. They emigrated from Iran in the early 80s. And it is all about taking care of the family. That is their sole objective. And part of it is her parents, I'm working with the kids, her parents are taking care of her right now because they want to. And for them as parents of these young kids, it's taking care of their kids, but it's also about not creating this thinking for the kids that they're entitled, that they think everybody lives with the affluence that they do. And to have the drive that the grandparents and the parents have for hard work and creating your own wealth. Because as we know, as estate planners, that drive can get lost in the generations. So it's really getting to know your clients. What makes them tick? What's the most important thing to them? And through that will come their culture, whatever that might be. And it is a wonderful experience, especially when you get to see a little bit more of the reality of that vision coming to fruition.
That's great. So, what I would say in my practice, if we've gotten to the point that I'm meeting with an estate planning client, I feel confident that somebody is willing to talk about this to some degree, right? And it may be taboo or uncomfortable. I think the best thing that I can do as an estate planner is to make sure that I'm creating the most open, inclusive, comfortable environment for the clients that I possibly can. And it means, focus, if it's spouses or partners, if it's more than one client, addressing both of them. I'm not focused on one of the clients and only the answers from that client. I want to hear both of their perspectives and encourage them to share if they're so willing. It's about, making the process as easy and painless as I can for them. So, again, providing a friendly atmosphere, making the turnaround quickly if I can. So, in my practice, I'm very calendar driven. I like to give myself deadlines and force myself to be held accountable. And, sometimes I take on too much, but it also gives the client an expectation of, when is this process going to be wrapped up, or, what's the next step? So, if I meet with a client and we outline the terms of their plan, I almost always have a follow-up meeting on our calendars when we leave that meeting to say, okay, we're going to come back together on this date. And it will either review drafts or review whatever our next action item is, so that they know, okay, this is the next step in the process, and maybe we can be done after that, or we'll at least have this piece of it done and I can put this to bed for a little while. Because these can be uncomfortable things for clients to talk about. One of my colleagues will sometimes say that the lawyer is in a lot of situations, the last piece of the estate planning puzzle. So they have a financial advisor that they really enjoy working with. They have a CPA that they enjoy working with, but they don't have an estate planning attorney because they don't want to talk about mortality and issues relative to the estate plan. So, a lot of times we come in and we're the last, advisor to the table, so to speak, because these are uncomfortable things. So, acknowledging that, addressing it, making it as comfortable a process for the clients as we can, and certainly having those hard conversations. And the best plans come out of open and honest and, difficult conversations. And the clients a lot of times, end up being really emotional. And I tell them, you're doing things exactly right. If this is hard for you to talk about, you're identifying with the issues, you're understanding them, you're thinking through them, and those usually produce the best plans. So I guess that's how I would address your question, Maria.
I kind of have a follow-up. And maybe, and I don't know if either of you would know this, but are there cultural implications that prohibit people of different cultures from assuming different state roles, like a trustee or an executor or a power of attorney?
There are certain legal restrictions based on, for example, residency. So, in New York State, for example, there are limitations on who can serve as executor or trustee of a testamentary trust. Usually, and when we have a client, for example, who wants to benefit a beneficiary who lives outside the country, that's always an issue that we are careful with. And a lot of times the result is if there's a trustee, somebody in the States that we think would be good to serve as a trustee for a beneficiary that lives internationally, a lot of times that's the plan that we adopt, because we know we'll have likely an easier time with a trustee who's a U.S. Citizen or a U.S. resident for purposes of that plan. But I haven't run into any issues where the plan is contrary to some legal rule or legal requirement, where we haven't been able to somehow plan around it using revocable trust, for example, or something along those lines.
You also mentioned the planning for the, I believe it was one of the Native American or the indigenous Indians, that it's a very matriarchal society, that it could be a situation where if you're pushing the spouse, the husband spouse, the male spouse, to be the fiduciary, that might rub the rest of the family the wrong way, because things are flowing down through the females. So I think it's a conversation worth having, certainly in a situation like that, that you might not even think of otherwise if you weren't cognizant of these conversations. So
yeah, I mean, part of this isn't just the legal part. Part of it is how can we I'm all about the execution of the plan. It's why I work for a wirehouse and get paid when people invest with me, is because the only way a plan works is to actually execute it. And so how can you make this execution as easy as possible? And so I recently have a client who had her mother passed away in the state of New York without a will or a trust. And she lives in California and has MS and is at the latter stages of MS. Well, and she's the only child of her mother. So how does she... So she had her stepbrother actually step in and be a co-executor, because he happened to live in New York City, which is where the probate was being done. And it made it easier to walk through the process by having somebody local who could engage with the local attorney and make sure that all the details got taken care of. And although that's not a cultural difference, it is an example of how really talking through who are the people in the plan that are going to help execute it, making sure that they have capacity and the willingness to do all the work and can do it fairly easily based upon location and principles and everything else that goes into the mix. It's not, I'm not an attorney, and it's so much more than just the law.
Well, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A unless somebody else had something. We've just got a few housekeeping things to finish up here. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, then at this point, I will give the second code. It is 3260. 3260. One final point is I have some good news from the Trust and Estate section that the holiday party is tentatively scheduled in person at the Strathallen for December 10th at 12:15. So mark your calendars, cross your fingers. We will hopefully have confirmation moving forward. So for those people that are interested, as far as we know at this time, they will require vaccination, as well as likely other mask mandates. But December 10th at 12:15, hopefully I'll be able to see all of your smiling faces at the Trust and Estate section holiday event.
And I just wanted to throw in that the Estate Planning Council, we're slated to have a hybrid program, our holiday program. Thursday, December 2nd, it will be at the Genesee Valley Club, sponsored by the Seneca Park Zoo Society and our EPC member, Ralph Code. That will be from the program 3:30 to 5, and then from 5 to 6, the reception networking, which we've all missed.
All right, well, thanks again, Rachelle. Thank you, Kit, for the information. Please make sure to send in your codes as well as your reviews. Thank you and have a nice weekend. Have a nice Halloween.